Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Raquel Faria. I am a doctor in internal medicine at the Centro Hospitalar Universitário do Porto. Today, I'm joined by Professors Ricard, Cervera and Zahir Amoura from the Lupus Academy Steering Committee, who will be providing expert insights from some key lupus research in 2022. 2022 was an interesting year in lupus, with studies sharing long-term safety data, novel treatments, and insights into what could change in future clinical practice. If one search in PubMed, 4,756 papers were published on lupus. Around 1,000 of them were reviews and opinion papers, 76 were clinical trials, another 76 were meta-analyses, and we selected some for discussion, some points that have not been previously discussed on previous podcasts. If you published interesting data on SLE in 2022 and we're not going to mention it, we are really sorry. Ricard, Zahir, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Raquel, for your introduction. Certainly, this has been a very busy year for lupus research and for lupologists. So I hope that we will be able to summarize a little bit of this busy year.
Several meetings and publications have shared new clinical data for both clinical available treatments in lupus as belimumab and ifrulumab, others that are used by internal medicine and rheumatologists for other clinical settings like baricitinib and ustekinumab, and the others that have been used in hematology and oncology and has been also tested for SLE like obinutuzumab, low-dose IL-2, Iberdomide, and others mostly tested in SLE like telitacicept and litifilimab. 2022 saw more positive trials in a short time period than ever before. I think you both agree that after more than 10 years of belimumab's approval and use, there is still some controversy on which is the right patient to use it, and in which lupus nephritis patient it should be used. And is it safe? Can it be used in all ethnic groups with the same efficacy? So, Ricard, you've been using belimumab in practice, I'm absolutely sure. What do you think that the last year's new data provided to get us more to the right point in belimumab's use?
Well, belimumab was the first approved biological therapy for lupus, and certainly during these years we still have many problems to know exactly which patients will benefit of this drug. And we have a couple of studies released during the last year, and I think that they enlighten a little bit on this problem. For instance, we have known on an open label extension of the BLISS lupus nephritis study. This was written by Rich Furie and collaborators in the Clinical Journal of the American Society of Nephrology. The initial results of this trial in lupus nephritis were published a couple of years ago in 2020 in the New England Journal of Medicine, and they showed the good results, the efficacy of belimumab, and they followed these patients until the week 104, so nearly 2 years. And here we have the extension for 28 additional weeks, and those patients that were already on belimumab, they continue on belimumab. There were 132. And those patients that in the trial were on placebo, they will switch to belimumab. This was the case of 123 patients. Well, we have good news because certainly safety is again good. So no new safety signals, exactly. And also efficacy. It was in general maintained through this open label phase and even a little bit increased. For instance, those patients that were switched from placebo to belimumab, the efficacy increased from 60 to 77% in the form of patients that achieved primary efficacy renal response, and those patients that were already in belimumab, they increased from 48% to 62%. So certainly these are good news for the use of belimumab in patients with lupus nephritis. And we have a second research paper that has been published this year. This has been published, written by Ellen Gitzler and collaborators in arthritis and rheumatology, in an important subset of patients Black African ancestry. The original BLISS trials presented the problem, and this was clearly stressed by the regulatory agencies, that the amount of patients from this ethnicity, from Black African ancestry, were too small. So the new trial was just for this subset of patients. It included 448 patients, so a good number of patients, exactly. And this the thing that didn't achieve is a significant thing. Fortunately, and this is probably the first trial in belimumab, that the difference was not statistically significant, but anyway, there was improvement in the number, in the figures. The primary endpoint, that was the same that in the BLISS trials, was 48% in belimumab arm and 41% in placebo. But this was not statistically significant. So there is a trend, so maybe additional studies should clearly address which subset of these patients with Black African ancestry will probably benefit more and will require additional research, certainly.
Zahir, what do you think about this? Do you think that this is a really big, relevant study? Do you think this would change your practice? What do you think about it?
So these studies are good news, as Ricard said before, because we need new treatment for the lupus nephritis. Lupus nephritis is still a severe disease in SLE. I mean that the morbidity is still high. At least 10% of the patients are evolving to end-stage renal disease at 10 or 15 years. Wow. So we need new drugs for the control of lupus nephritis. I think that the main question about belimumab and the two studies quoted by Ricard are interesting and are adding new data about a huge bulk of good news on lupus nephritis. But the main question is, do we need to use belimumab as first line, or do we need to wait until the standard of care is a failure?
Yes.
So my opinion is because the morbidity of lupus nephritis is high, I think that it's better to add belimumab as first line.
Yes, and
I know that this advice is not shared by all my colleagues and especially some nephrologists, but I still don't understand this point because the morbidity is high. So if you have a drug showing a difference between the standard of care, not the placebo, the standard of care and the drug, I think this drug should be used as early as possible.
And this is
another point which is very interesting is that in the extension phase of belimumab study, there was no signal of on safety. So the drug is safe. You can use it either IV or subcutaneously. So it has changed my way of treating the lupus nephritis patients.
And the BLISS-LN study showed the data that was statistically significant was doing it at first, not in refractory patients. So we kind of have to think about it. That was what data showed. Of course, there's costs in it, but if you think in costs at long term in lupus nephritis, they are a lot. So
yes, but the dialysis is also with a high cost. So you have to balance between the cost of dialysis, the evolution of the lupus nephritis and stage renal disease versus the improvement of lupus nephritis. So my opinion is to treat with the 3 drugs, the standard of care, first. I don't know what is the advice, the opinion of Ricard on this issue, but...
Well, this is certainly a very good option. I think that clearly the study stress to use as early as possible. The alternative possibility would be probably to start with the standard therapy, but monitor carefully, and if at 3 months, for instance, so early in the treatment, there is no response, add so soon this biological therapy. So the idea is probably use as early as possible.
Yes, that's good insights. Thank you. And we have another drug that is available and approved, anifrolumab, that, as always, have differences in restrict approvals, national approvals in different countries. So lupologists are having more patients on it through Europe and all over the world. And there was some worries about its safety, and they are getting used. And the development program for the drug also got us more news in the last year. So, Ricard, can you please comment on some published data on anifrolumab?
Yeah, that's right. We lupologists were happy that we had the second approved biological therapy for lupus, and in many countries we are still waiting for the final national approvals and reimbursement to use it. But in the meantime, we are having more information. For instance, one thing that we were worried was that the phase 3 trials, although phase 2 data was really amazing, phase 3 trials, the very first one, was not as clear because the endpoint failed when using the SRI, but not when using the BICLA. And this is one of these, let's say, methodological issues that we are always worried. And in this study that was done by Ian Bruce and colleagues and published last year in Annals of Rheumatic Diseases, they analyzed a little bit what happened in these patients, if there was concordance or discordance in the outcome measures between the use of BICLA or the use of SRI-4. And they realized that certainly the vast majority of the patients presented concordance between BICLA and SRI-4 outcomes, between 78% and 85%. Show concordance, but those patients that there were discordance between BICLA and SRI, they managed to find that there were probably some reasons for this. For instance, in this group of discordance, the placebo-treated patients had lower baseline disease activity joint counts and glucocorticoid tapering rates. And more placebo-treated patients had arthritis response than anifrolumab-treated patients. So these are probably some aspects that in the baseline disease activity that should be taken into consideration when designing a trial in order to avoid these potential failures at the end of the trial. So I think this is an important lesson that we have learned from this study.
Yes, the methodology has been really discussed. The amount of steroids patients are doing in both arms, both the baseline activity. Thank you. And what do you think about David Jane anifrolumab paper on active lupus nephritis? Ricard?
I think that it is what we are now expecting is that we hope that we now will move in the same way that with belimumab, that we move to the use in lupus nephritis. We will move with anifrolumab in lupus nephritis. So hopefully we will, with the current ongoing trials, demonstrate the efficacy in active lupus nephritis as well.
Can I add a comment, Raquel?
Yes, of course. And I was just asking you to do it because the first time I heard that someone was using anifrolumab on the trial was when I was talking with you in a conversation some years ago in Lupus Academy, Meet the Experts Breakfast, and you were concerned about herpes infection, and I went to look for it and study after that conversation. And what do you think about it now? Not only about the use of anifrolumab in SLE and lupus nephritis, but also on this risk of herpes that was really a concern. Do you vaccinate your patients?
Yes, of course. So we are lucky in France because we had an early access program to anifrolumab, in which 26 patients were included. So we had a real live data. All the patients were treated by belimumab first, but it was a failure. It was mandatory and what we have observed is in line with the studies, the trials. So it has a very good and rapid efficacy on skin manifestations and also on arthritis. But we had herpes zoster, we had shingles first, and we also had 2 COVID. Because you know that there are SLE patients with antibodies against interferon, which is mimicking the effect of anifrolumab, and these patients are at risk of severe COVID infection. So the recommendations for patients treated with anifrolumab is vaccinate patients against shingles, possible, because the vaccine is not always available.
Yes.
And also vaccinate patients against COVID. It's mandatory because the risk of severe COVID when you are treated with anti-interferon is high. So please vaccinate the patient. Another point is about the David J study.
Yes.
The use of anifrolumab in lupus nephritis. It was a phase 2 study published in Annals of Rheumatic Diseases, and the primary endpoint was not met. But the primary endpoint was low proteinuria at 1 year, only low proteinuria below 0.7 or 0.5, I don't remember exactly. And something which was interesting is that they did pharmacokinetic studies showing that when they add GFR to the primary endpoint, and when the patients were treated with intense treatment, I mean high dose of anifrolumab, the secondary primary endpoint was met. When you have low levels of albuminemia, you have a decrease of the efficacy of monoclonal antibodies. So you have to increase the dose of monoclonal antibodies when the patients have low albuminemia. This is something which is known, for example, for belimumab. If you use belimumab subcutaneously, you have, in lupus nephritis, you have to increase the dose during the first month. It's not 200 per week, it's 400 per week. Okay? So it could be an explanation for the failure of the lupus nephritis trial. And all the other explanation is that the first primary endpoint was only based on proteinuria. And we know that you have to add the outcome of GFR to the primary endpoint. You can't have a primary endpoint relying only on proteinuria. The renal function is very important for the outcome.
So you think that despite the negative result, it needs to be more explored, and for years. Yes,
it was a secondary endpoint of the study of David Jane, published by David Jane, in the intense treatment arm, using an endpoint with proteinuria plus GFR. The trial was a success. Okay? So
yes.
I think that we will use anifrolumab in lupus nephritis. Just we need to increase the dose during the first month of treatment.
Thank you for adding that. Ricard, you're on duty to describe and comment this first part of the podcast. And there's some news on B-cell depletion. So we all use off-label rituximab. We almost forget that it's being used off-label in severe and refractory SLE, although it was not approved due to failure in clinical trials. And now we are betting on another B-cell depleter to treat lupus nephritis. What do you think about the obinutuzumab published data last year?
Well, this was, I think, a very important step in the demonstration of what I think that most lupologists believe is that B-cell depletion, anti-CD20 therapy is useful in patients with lupus. And the only reason that not only rituximab, but also ocrelizumab was another humanized anti-CD20 drug failed was because of the difficulties in trial design. And now we have another even more humanized anti-CD20 that is obinutuzumab. I think that the more humanized, the more difficult to pronounce is this molecule. And this last year, Rich Furie and colleagues published in the Annals of Rheumatic Diseases the results of the Nobility trial that was a phase 2 trial on obinutuzumab, and we had good data. There is certainly safety, that is the main reason of phase 2 trial, but also there was an improvement in the renal response through week 104 in those patients with lupus nephritis who receive obinutuzumab plus standard therapies compared to just the standard therapies. So we really are eager now to have the data of the phase 3 trials and to be able to demonstrate forever then B-cell depletion with anti-CD20 is a good option in patients with lupus.
Zahir, do you have any comments on this and on okay, it works, now we could prove it. We knew it, but we could prove it. So what do you think about it?
No, I agree with Ricard, but we have to wait until we get the results of the phase 3 study, Regency. And the recruitment for this study has just ended this week. So hopefully we'll get the results during the next months. I don't know. And but I am quite sure that it's a good option. Again, the risk of severe COVID when you are treated with anti-CD20 is high. So you need to vaccinate your patient. And this is something that we see in all the trials. When the drug is highly effective, the infectious risk is high. So vaccinations is a good way to prevent the infectious complications, the viral infectious complications.
Thank you for reinforcing that. There are now 2 drugs that, as I mentioned before, we are comfortable with its use because we have practice with Baricitinib in rheumatoid arthritis, and we have practice with ustekinumab in psoriatic arthritis. And they were looking promising on the first trials in SLE, and then they didn't get to primary outcomes. Ricard, despite the enterprise statement on stopping development Baricitinib for lupus, what do you think about its mechanisms in SLE? And what do you think about Thomas Dörner paper? Do you think it's going to change anything about it, Ricard?
Well, certainly we were all expecting that a drug that has demonstrated good efficacy in a disease that shares many aspects with lupus, that is rheumatoid arthritis, the treatment with Janus kinase inhibitors, Baricitinib, would also work in patients with lupus. And there are many mechanistic studies that have demonstrated that it could work. And actually, at the beginning of the study in humans, in this trial that has the results, the preliminary results have been published by Thomas Dörner in Arthritis Research Therapy this year, showing that there is a significant decrease on the titers of anti-DNA antibodies and on the titers of immunoglobulins levels in patients treated with Baricitinib as compared to placebo. And this decrease was quite soon. It appears at week 2. These mechanistic ideas, these mechanistic concepts, really, we all expected that could be translated to the clinical efficacy.
Yes.
Apparently, this is not the case, and as everybody knows, the trial has been stopped by the drug company because of interim analysis that have shown that there is no clinical response. But we hope that really further steps will be done to try to see if there are also methodological problems in the trial design, because this study of Thomas Dörner and colleagues really reinforces in humans that mechanistically this could be a good therapy.
Zahir, we also know that Baricitinib has an interferon blockage. So do you think that this could be as rituximab was on the beginning? We know it is supposed to work, but they just stopped developing it. What do you think about these data?
Yes. No, I think it's a promising drug, but the result, the facts are other facts. So the development of the drug has been stopped. Another issue for the use of JAK inhibitors is the warning about the risk of cardiovascular complications.
Yes.
So we should wait until we get results on both the efficacy and the safety. But it was disappointing because it's from a mechanistic point of view, it's very interesting. So, but we need to have facts.
Yes, and probably it can be that some other company is going to develop another JAK inhibitor that is going to prove that it works. So
Yes.
let's just wait. And Zahir, Do you think ustekinumab is in the same level of discussion as we were having to baricitinib?
But in a way, it's the same sad story, because you know that ustekinumab is a monoclonal antibody targeting the P40 subunit of IL-12 and IL-23.
Great.
We know that these two cytokines are involved in the pathogenesis of lupus, and something which is very interesting is that ustekinumab is already approved for the treatment of Crohn's disease and psoriatic arthritis.
Yes.
The first study was published in The Lancet by Ron van Vollenhoven, and it was a success.
Yes.
And it was very exciting, very promising. But unfortunately, the phase 3 study, the Lotus study, has been stopped after anterior analysis, and the sponsor has decided to stop the development of the drug in lupus. So as for baricitinib, we don't have demonstration of the efficacy of ustekinumab of lupus, but we can use it in clinical practice.
Yes.
Maybe in refractory lupus, it could be a treatment to give to our patients who are not responding to standard of care, for example.
That was exactly what I was going to ask you both. It's not approved. We do have drugs that are available for other clinical conditions, and there are patients that don't meet, and don't meet exactly the entry point for clinical trials. They are not as severe as to go for other approved drugs with lupus. So for those who are listening to us, you are not recommending, but is it safe and useful to consider these drugs if you have a refractory patient, both for Bari and ustekinumab, off-label, of course? Ricard, do you want to answer?
Yes, I agree that this could be an option that we have to keep in mind, and especially in those patients that have both conditions. We have patients with lupus, with rheumatoid arthritis plus lupus. We have patients with psoriasis plus lupus. So at least in these patients, we have to think on this option on these two options that can help both diseases.
So it's so very good to have this opportunity to have your insights, because you are experts on SLE, and the patients in the clinical practice, they are not as in the books or in the trials, and patients do have more than one disease. So it's really useful, and thank you for your insights to bring this up, that patients can have rheumatoid and lupus, patients can have Crohn's diseases and lupus, patients can have psoriatic arthritis and lupus. And despite these negative trials data, it's safe. At least we know that it's safe to use in lupus, and we can think about them. Thank you so much for that insight. And now I will bring it up to talk about a drug that has been developed for lupus. So, Zahir, do you think we have promising data on telitacicept, both in adult and child SLE? We're not able to use it yet, but what do you think about data about it?
First, telitacicept is a humanized recombinant TACI-Fc fusion protein. So we need to keep that in mind. So in a way, the brother of atacicept, which has been developed a long time ago and which was a failure.
Yes.
And we now have good data on the efficacy and the safety of telitacicept in lupus, both in adult lupus and in childhood onset lupus. So it's certainly a promising drug also, because this drug is targeting the BLyS-TACI pathway, and we know with belimumab that inhibiting this pathway could be successful. So I'm waiting the other results from other studies in ongoing studies, but I'm quite sure that this will be interesting in the near future. May I add a comment about the use of drugs that are not approved for SLE?
Oh, of course.
I just want to say that this is exactly what we do, what we did every day in clinical practice by using some immunosuppressant drugs that are not approved for SLE, not only biologics. I mean, some immunosuppressants that we use every day for the treatment of lupus are not approved. I'm not saying that you should first use non-approved drugs for the treatment of SLE. Of course, you first use the approved drugs, but we should keep in mind that this is exactly what we are doing for a long time. In refractory patients, for example, we are using non-approved drugs, but they are approved in other rheumatic disorders, so for example.
Zahir, there are other two drugs that I think in the papers are also promising. Do you want to comment on Iberdomide and litifilimab data on SLE?
Litifilimab is very interesting from my point of view. Litifilimab is a monoclonal antibody targeting blood dendritic cell antigen 2, BDCA2, which is expressed exclusively on plasmacytoid dendritic cells. And when you are targeting this cell surface antigen, you are suppressing the production of type 1 interferon by dendritic cells. And the efficacy of litifilimab has been published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It was a phase 2 study, but it has been published in the New England Journal of Medicine. The first author was Raquel Faria. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, this drug has shown a good efficacy on cutaneous manifestation, not on arthritis, but cutaneous manifestation. And another point which is very interesting is that litifilimab can be used subcutaneously. And I think this is very important for the development of new drugs in SLE. If you are targeting non-venous manifestations of lupus, the subcutaneous way is very important because the patients don't need to be hospitalized. So you can treat them ambulatory. So it's interesting. So this new drug had a good efficacy on cutaneous manifestation, not on arthritis manifestation. And I think it's a very promising drug for the treatment of cutaneous manifestation of SLE.
Good news. Good news. Do you want to comment on Iberdomide? Do you think that this new targeting is also promising? Do you think that it is for special patients?
Yes, because this drug is targeting another way of the pathogenesis of SLE. So Iberdomide is a high affinity cereblon ligand that target the hematopoietic transcription factors named Icaros and Ionos. And these factors are involved in the proteasomal degradation. Mm-hmm. So you can decrease the level of autoantibodies by using Iberdomide, and we have a kind of proof of concept. I'm not sure it's a proof of concept, but it was a phase 2 trial published by Raquel Faria, again, showing that this new treatment was quite effective in the treatment of SLE. It was interesting. It was a placebo-controlled study. It was also a dose escalation study, but it was a phase 2, and the results are promising. So it's very interesting because it's targeting a new target of the SLE pathogenesis.
So we've been talking for almost 40 minutes, and we're excited about discussing this. So I'm going to ask you both some final comments about new things that you think that in papers and congresses in 2022 could change our practice, or things that you want to mention about it. Can we start from you, Ricard? What do you want to highlight, despite all we have been discussing for the last 40 minutes? In research, clinical practice, ways of thinking, what do you want to highlight from the last year's news?
Probably three ideas would be important to highlight. On one side, we have a new way to treat autoimmune diseases that comes from oncology, hemato-oncology, that is the CAR T therapy. This has demonstrated efficacy in patients with terrible leukemias, lymphomas that were refractory to all the lines of therapy. And as we always do, we translate from or transfer from oncology many of the therapies to autoimmune diseases. And this year has been released the study of 5 patients with lupus refractory to other therapies that have been treated with CAR T therapy anti-CD19. The group of Andreas Mackensen from Germany demonstrated that they produce a complete remission in these 5 patients. This certainly is something promising. We have to wait for proper trials in larger series of patients. But certainly this is something that we are really waiting for additional information. On the other side, I think it's important also a new concept that has been introduced this year in the field of lupus is the concept of disease modification. This is a concept that was already introduced in other conditions, for instance, in rheumatoid arthritis, systemic sclerosis recently, but this year also was introduced in the field of lupus. The idea is not just to produce the reliefs of symptoms or the improvement in disease activity state, that it's actually what these outcomes that we were discussing, the SRI or the PICLA demonstrated, but also to impede or to alter or to decrease the progression of the course of the disease. So the drugs should demonstrate really that they modify the disease course of the disease in the future. I think this is a concept that it's important to stress. And from the pathogenesis of the disease, I think that it's probably important to increase our knowledge on the relationship between the microbiome and the disease. This is a field that has been explored in many diseases, in many conditions, and just this year there was a meta-analysis of in different studies performed in patients with lupus, and they certainly demonstrate that there are some differences between the microbiota of patients with lupus versus controls, and also between patients treated with high-dose glucocorticoids and those that receive, for instance, hydroxychloroquine. This that we probably already know from the clinical practice. It is also found in the microbiota studies in patients with lupus, that hydroxychloroquine probably also protects the gut microbiota of patients with lupus. I think these are some aspects that I would like to stress that were published last year.
all of them good and promising to be developed in the future. Zahir, what are your highlights of the year, besides everything that we've been talking today?
So I'm sorry, the time is running, so I will only mention one approach that is very promising for me for the management of lupus. And I would like to highlight the papers that have been published on drug monitoring in SLE.
Perfect.
One good paper has been published by Michel Petri. It's a review of some of the monitoring of some drugs in SLE. And I think that this is a key point for the management of SLE, because finally we are giving the same dose of drugs to all the patients.
Yes.
And I still don't understand why, because we have to try to individualize the dose. So the drug monitoring could be helpful for that. This is the one way, on one hand, what could be the usefulness of drug monitoring. And the other one, of course, is that lupus is a chronic disease. So we need to assess the compliance, the adherence of our patients. After 1 year of treatment, only 60% of our patients are fully compliant. So we need to know whether they are taking the drug, and also to individualize the dose of the drug. And the drug monitoring could be useful for that. And this has been demonstrated for anifrolumab in the lupus nephritis trial, because they gave the same dose for the patients, and it was a failure. But when they increased the dose, it was the intense treatment arm, it was successful. So I think this is a key issue of the management of lupus in the future, which can be used in clinical practice.
Yes, and it is a new and exciting age to treat lupus. We have new drugs, and we have hard data on strategies that we can use to better treat.
Drug strategies.
Yes, to better treat patients with lupus. Ricard, Zahir, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your insights from last year. To our listeners, we hope these discussions have helped you gain more of an understanding of lupus and developments throughout 2022. Please visit the show notes for references for studies mentioned in this discussion. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please leave us a review, which will really help us in reaching as many of your colleagues as possible around the world. Join us again next month for more discussion, key issues in the management of lupus.